Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. In today's coverage of the ongoing civil war taking place inside of the former state of Ethiopia, the fighting continues. And today's videos, I'm going to focus on three areas of the conflict. First and foremost, I'm going to have a look at the ongoing operation that is being conducted by the Tigrayan Defense Forces within the Western Tigray area of operations. And that operation, again, is from a DRK in areas all the way to Humera. But again, that operation continues. Secondly, we're going to have a look at some ongoing efforts that are taking place inside of the Oromia region. And then finally, we are going to talk about certain tactics that are being employed, specifically the term that is widely being utilized in this conflict, known as the human wave attack, and I'll talk about that in depth here very shortly. But first, the fighting that is occurring in the western areas of the Tigray region. So again, this area here on my map, where my cursor is tracing along the border areas, this is western Tigray. This area was controlled by the Tigray region. It was part of the Tigray region prior to the conflict starting. Prior to the deployment of Eritrea, an external state actor that, for all intensive purposes, has co-joined this invasion of the Tigray region and the former state of Ethiopia. And then obviously the Abiy loyalist forces in conjunction with its Amhara regional paramilitary allies. But again, in previous videos, we had discussed that a new operation is in fact underway by the Tigrayan Defense Forces. We are starting to see company-sized, battalion-sized elements of the Tigrayan Defense Forces crossing the Tigray River at various points. This is the Tigray River, for those of you who are not familiar with this ongoing conflict. And the concept behind this operation would appear to be a effort to secure the border with the Amhara region, at the same time driving towards Ade Remets. Again, we're also seeing the deployment of additional Tigrayan Defense Forces along the border of Sudan. And that's over here where my cursor is going back and forth in a north-south direction. But again, it would appear that this is part of a much larger operation that also includes a fairly significant advance into the northern Amhara region. Specifically, a DRK has been taken recently, and forces of the Tigrayan Defense Forces, the Tigrayan Army, are continuing to proceed south of a DRK as well. But again, this is probably one of the largest operations in terms of a concentration of Tigrayan Defense Forces being moved and deployed into the western Tigray region. In past efforts by the Tigrayan Defense Forces, we have not seen this size and scope of operation that we are seeing right now in the western Tigray region. And again, the efforts behind this is to retake territory that was controlled by the Tigray region prior to the onset of hostilities, prior to the onset of the Abiy loyalists invading the Tigray region. In conjunction with the despotic regime of Isaias Afwerki. But again, seizing control of Western Tigray, retaking Western Tigray, would give the Tigray region a true international border with Sudan, a less hostile actor, a less hostile state. Obviously, as we speak right now, the Tigray region is literally surrounded by hostile entities. One, the Abiy loyalists, the Amhara region to the east, You have the Afar region, which has thrown its support in with the Abiy loyalists, and obviously the architect of this entire fiasco, quite possibly Isaias Afwerki in the despotic state of Eritrea. But again, that is the operational plan at this point, again, to drive out the forces of the Amhara regional militias and the Eritrean military, with elements of the Abiy loyalists operating in the western Tigray region. The operation has been ongoing now for about 72 hours, probably a little bit more than that. Again, the focus right now is quite possibly the seizure of Adiremets. We do know the Tigrayan Defense Forces are operating now to both the north and in some cases south and east of Adiremets, in terms of looking to envelop that town and then possibly destroy any Amhara regional militia entity that is in Adiremets, seize the town, and then quite possibly look to move to other objectives within Western Tigray, with the eventual goal of seizing all of Western Tigray, and most importantly, having the ability to have a non-hostile state actor border that Tigray can trade, receive food, weapons, whatever it needs to exist as a nation state. Again, for all intents and purposes, the Tigray region right now is fundamentally an independent nation state, separate from the former state of Ethiopia and the Abiy loyalist forces and its Amhara regional allies. And as you can see, there's Tigray on the map. In other news, we continue to see the Oromo Liberation Army very, very much active within the scope of this conflict. We continue to see the Oromo Liberation Army taking control of towns, specifically more of the minor and smaller towns within the former state of Ethiopia, specifically in the Oromia region. Again, the Oromo Liberation Army looks to create a sovereign and independent Oromo state in Oromia that is separate from a federalized state with a strong centralized government that may not have the best interest of the Oromo people in mind, and that is one of the biggest issues right now for Oromia and the Oromo people. But again, the fighting continues. The recruitment and the buildup of the Oromo Liberation Army continues unabated. It has become a very sizable force, quite possibly now numbering in the tens of thousands. Again, we're looking at widespread tracts of the Oromia region that is now in control by the Oromo Liberation Army. And again, we are seeing town after town, especially in the more rural areas of Oromia, falling to the Oromo Liberation Army. And the intelligence that we are getting would indicate that as of right now, the Abiy loyalist forces in Addis Ababa, also known as Finfine for the Oromo peoples, at this point, the Abiy loyalists right now, quite possibly, fear the continued unrest in Oromia more than what is going on within the Tigray region at this point. Now, obviously, that was not the case when the Tigrayan Defense Forces were knocking on the door of Debre Berhan, which is right here, again, during that recent Tigrayan Defense Force multi-week offensive that in which we observed the Tigrayan Defense Forces driving more than 150 miles south out of the Tigray region and even threatening Addis Ababa. Now that the Tigrayan Defense Forces have withdrawn from much of the Amhara region and are no longer threatening Addis Ababa, also known as Finfine, Right now, it would appear the biggest threat, within, at least within the vicinity of several dozens of miles away from Addis Ababa, is the Oromo Liberation Army. And that, in fact, is creating somewhat of a fracture within this alliance that we see with the Amhara region and the centralized government of the Abiy loyalists based in Addis Ababa. But again, we are continuing to see the Amhara regional government raise its own army, its own military forces that are now operating in parallel to the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. But again, these forces do not have a unity of command. In fact, there have been cases of infighting between Amhara regional militias and the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, the federal forces, also known as the Abiy loyalist forces, during the course of this conflict. But again, the Amhara regional military sees the threat of the Tigrayan Defense Forces, and right now the Abiy loyalist forces in and around Addis Ababa see the continued rise of the Oromo Liberation Army quite possibly as more of a threat. And at this point, we are starting to see some of those drone assets being utilized against the Oromo Liberation Army, against targets of opportunity throughout the Oromia region. And that again is creating somewhat of a fracture between these two forces, the Amhara regional military and the Abiy loyalist-based government in Addis Ababa. So that is the current conflict right now in terms of what we are seeing on the ground. We will certainly have more to come in the near future, but I wanted to talk quickly and discuss as we continue to see this operation in western Tigray underway by the Tigrayan Defense Forces in its effort to reclaim western Tigray. We continue to hear about human wave assaults, human wave tactics. Now, human wave tactics have been utilized throughout history. We have seen even within the context of modern times is really where it has gained notoriety, such as North Korean human wave attacks against American tanks and heavy weapons during the Korean War. We have seen Iranian paramilitary units during the Iran-Iraq War launching so-called human wave attacks against Iraqi defense positions. We have seen it really throughout history. We have seen it during the Zulu-British War. That was launched successfully, where we saw massed waves of Zulu warriors attacking lines of British regulars. So again, that would be an instance where it was successful. Now, within the context of this conflict, I think it is being misinterpreted as a human wave attack. We continue to hear about the Tigrayan Defense Forces employing human wave assaults, which make the listener, the person interested in the conversation, think that the Tigrayan Defense Forces are throwing waves and waves of human capital against defensive positions at a tremendous loss of life. So again, that is simply not the case of what is occurring. In many cases, the Tigrayan Defense Forces are simply using a bounding overwatch tactic in which the Tigrayans are laying down suppressive fire against a defensive position, either to the flank or on top of a terrain feature against an opposing target or an opposing defensive position. At the same time, suppressive fire is being laid down, then obviously a body of infantry is then closing with the defensive position in which that force then looks to seize control over. So again, within the context of the Tigrayan Defense Forces and the concept of the human wave attack, attack. That is not what we are seeing within the scope of this conflict. These are not forces being thrown at, say, a machine gun position just to be mowed down in hopes that the opposing force runs out of ammunition and the Tigrayan Defense Force then overruns said position. That is not what is occurring. Now, do they eventually overrun and make that defensive position capitulate or surrender? Yes, and in fact they do. But most of the time, that defensive position has been enveloped and is receiving suppressive fire to either the flanks and or an overwatch position in which the corresponding infantry formation that is advancing upon the defensive position is then in fact not being fired upon, because there's adequate suppressive fire keeping the heads down of the defensive position, so they cannot return fire against the advancing force. So again, just some basic rudimentary strategy, but again, our tactics, for the most part, we are not seeing the type of human wave assaults that we have seen in other conflicts throughout history. Again, these are bounding Overwatch style maneuvers. These are flanking maneuvers where the defensive position is in a state of suppression. It is under either active artillery fire in conjunction with heavy machine gun fire, forcing the defensive position to become really to have the inability to fire on the advancing force at times. Now, needless to say, there are times where obviously that advancing force is engaged, and for whatever reason, that attack may then break off. But again, the whole concept behind that attack is not to throw waves of infantry to simply be mowed down and slaughtered. It is designed first and foremost to suppress the defensive position and then advance on that defensive position with what you would define as waves of infantry assaulting the position. But again, that position is being suppressed by both artillery fire at times and direct heavy machine gun fire, and again utilizing a bounding type Overwatch tactic. Again, not a traditional human wave assault. We're not really seeing that from the Tigrayan Defense Forces at this point. Not a traditional human wave assault where the individual soldier is seen as cannon fodder and expendable. Again, there is a method to what you are seeing, and again, on some of the videos that you're seeing, yes, it would appear that you do see a large body of infantry advancing towards an objective, and many some novice analyst has defined that as a human wave assault. Again, that is not a human wave assault in its traditional form. Again, there are other factors coming into play, especially the concept of the bounding Overwatch and additional flanking movements and suppression. Suppression is very important when you are advancing like that, and that is what is occurring on the ground in terms of what we're seeing from the Tigrayan Defense Forces and some of these actions that we have observed throughout the conflict. And we'll probably see more of that in the obviously the days and weeks to come as this operation continues in western Tigray. That's what we have for you today. More to come very, very soon. Thanks for joining us.